John Tyler enters the line of presidents like a quiet hinge that suddenly bears the weight of a door no one expected to open. He is there in the background of the parade, Virginia lawyer, legislator, gentleman of the Tidewater, until the nation's most theatrical campaign puts him in the second chair as a flourish on a slogan. Then the first chair is empty, far too soon, and the man meant to be a symbol discovers he must be a system. He takes up the pen with a composure that angers those who think accidents should apologize for themselves, and he proceeds to act as if legitimacy lies in duty performed, not in the manner of one's arrival. His Accidency, they sneer, inventing a nickname to reduce a constitutional question to a joke. He answers the way a careful man answers a jeer, not at all, and then with a string of decisions that make the joke irrelevant. The oath he takes is not half an oath. The office he occupies is not a regency. From the moment John Tyler asserts that he is the president, the whole of it, his story becomes a study in how institutions ripen under stress and how a republic learns, in the space of a month, what it means to have a succession, even when its parchment did not yet say so, in the neat words later generations would add. He is born into the Virginia that tutored presidents as if they were a crop, 1790s air. Plantations along tidal rivers, the law learned in rooms with windows on fields that fed and bound you. His father, judge, governor, ally of Jefferson, teaches him that liberty has a local accent and that federal power must be watched as one watches a fire in a wooden house. Young Tyler grows in the shadow of that creed. Strict construction of the Constitution, suspicion of banks that turn paper into leverage over farmers, devotion to the sovereignty of states as if they were living persons with the right to refuse impositions. He reads law, rides circuits, and learns to speak like a man who believes sentences should have clauses but not contortions. In the House of Delegates, then the U.S. House, then the governor's mansion, then the Senate, he practices a method more than he invents a doctrine. He measures proposals against first principles and feels for the string that, once pulled, unravels a compact. When Andrew Jackson treats the bank as a dragon to be slain, Tyler agrees with the slaying, but winces at the fire. When Jackson bends power to break South Carolina's theory of nullification, Tyler admires the Union defended and distrusts the manner of defense. Again and again, he proves himself a constitutional romantic with a lawyer's caution. A man who prefers the old grammar even when he writes new lines. He leaves the Senate over a point of honor that looks, to modern eyes, like a small hinge and to his own, like the whole door. The legislature of Virginia instructs him how to vote. He refuses, and when the quarrel ripens, he resigns rather than treat representation like a leash. That act, half principled stand and half performance of Virginia pride, costs him position and buys him reputation. The Whigs, an improvised orchestra of men whose common instrument is their dislike of Jackson's voltage. Notice the Virginian who cannot abide executive swagger and who speaks gently while the Capitol shouts. They will make of him a balance on a ticket that needs one, a Southern strict constructionist to offset a Western hero, a states' rights lawyer to soften the silhouette of a party that likes banks and roads. Tippecanoe and Tyler, too, turns a lifetime into a chorus, and the chorus into votes. William Henry Harrison strides into the chair through a storm of log cabins on wheels and barrels of hard cider. A month later, pneumonia or exhaustion, or simply bad luck, leaves a space that the Constitution had not yet furnished with clear furniture. John Tyler steps in and, in the act that will outlive everything else he does, insists that step means the whole stride. That insistence is not a footnote, it is the creation of a rule. He refuses to be acting president, refuses to convene a regency around the cabinet, refuses to wear modesty as a constitutional veil. He moves into the White House and receives the oath as if the parchment silences were invitations to common sense, not to improvisations by committee. The cabinet, chosen by Harrison and dominated by Henry Clay's programmatic confidence, expects to be a board of directors and finds itself staff. Clay, who has long dreamed of redomesticating the federal government inside his American system, a national bank to discipline credit, a protective tariff to foster industry, internal improvements to bind the continent, assumes that a vice president, elevated by fate, will treat the speaker of the age as prime minister. Tyler bows to courtesy and then refuses the premise. It is the first quarrel and the last peace between them. What follows is not theater so much as a civics lesson delivered with vetoes. Clay moves to recharter a national bank, first as a fiscal bank, then to accommodate Tyler's constitutional scruples as a fiscal corporation. Tyler's construction is not posture, it is a calculus. He reads the chartering of a bank with nationwide branches as a power neither enumerated nor necessarily implied, and he fears the political economy such an engine creates, states reduced to provinces under a directorate of paper. He vetoes, carefully and twice. Clay responds not with compromise, but with fury, because for Clay, the bank is not a trinket, but the keystone of a national architecture. The Whig Party, which had used John Tyler as a name stitched to bunting, discovers it has elevated a mind. The cabinet resigns en masse under Clay's whip, everyone but Daniel Webster, who stays to finish the peace with Britain he has begun. The Whigs expel Tyler from the party, as if excommunication could alter arithmetic. He becomes, in a phrase that will cling, a president without a party, which is simply to say a president who will have to build every coalition anew. His enemies interpret his vetoes as vanity and revenge. To read them that way is to miss the method. Tyler does not dislike national credit because he dislikes commerce. He dislikes instruments that erase boundaries without persuasion. He advances, in place of Clay's bank, an exchequer plan, public, limited, accountable to Congress, to handle government receipts and payments without becoming a sovereign lender. It pleases no one, too statist for Jacksonian purists, too cramped for Whig financiers. He accepts a tariff when the government's finances require it, vetoing first the versions that smuggle permanent distribution of land revenues to states inside the bill, and then signing the tariff of 1842 once that device is removed. He is not playing games. He is using the only tools the system gives a president who refuses to be a clerk and cannot be a tribune: the pen that says no, the message that explains why, and the patience to let the country learn that the executive is a branch, not a seal. Webster, meanwhile, keeps at the long business of cooling the northern border. Under Tyler's eye and signature, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty settles with measured prose what newspapers had cheerfully dramatized as the Aroostook War, the line between Maine and New Brunswick, a dispute whose absurdity, militias mustered over the fate of timber crews and maps, could have ripened into tragedy if pride had been allowed to write the orders. The treaty also creates a structure for extradition and suppresses, in principle, the slave trade on the high seas, a gesture fragile in practice, but honest in intent. It is the sort of statecraft Tyler likes, precise, almost austere, respectful of jurisdiction, arranged so that the machinery of cooperation can turn without appearing to grind someone's honor into dust. When Webster resigns at last, he leaves a peace made not of bravado, but of signatures that still matter on a winter map. Domestic unrest tests Tyler's definition of federal authority. In Rhode Island, the Dorr Rebellion breaks out, a collision between an old colonial charter that stifles suffrage and a movement to write a people's constitution by will, if not by law. Tyler recognizes the governor under the old forms because the republic's health depends upon some standard other than whatever number of citizens can be coaxed into a parade. He prepares to enforce order if asked, but prefers persuasion to bayonets. The crisis deflates when the passion that swelled it finds a legal exit. Reforms come, slowly, through the very institutions Dorr had wished to bypass. Tyler is not the hero of this story, but he understands its moral. A national executive must be slow to declare a state illegitimate, slower still to make federal force the arbiter of a state's argument with itself. If the northern boundary is a puzzle for patience, the southwestern horizon is a magnet for appetite. Texas, republic now, born of revolt against Mexico and nourished by southern hopes for new slave soil, lies like a promise and a quarrel at once. The The question of annexation smolders under Tyler's term, fanned by men who think destiny a respectable synonym for advantage, and checked by men who can count Senate votes and understand that adding a great slave state will reorder every table where compromises are added and eaten. Abel Upshur, Tyler's Secretary of State after Webster, presses the business deftly, as if chess could keep pace with hunger. Then Steele interrupts history on the Potomac. A new warship, the Princeton, cruises with Washington society aboard. A demonstration gun named Peacemaker bursts. Upshur is killed, as is Secretary of the Navy Thomas Gilmer and other dignitaries. The river receives pieces of a day that had been arranged to flatter the city's sense of itself. Tyler, widowed not long before, is on deck to comfort a young woman whose father has just died. Later he will marry her, Julia Gardner, a generation younger, turning private grief into a remade household and inviting into the president's house a first lady with a talent for ceremonial presence that softens the edges of a presidency conducted under siege. With Upshur gone, Tyler reaches for John C. Calhoun, brilliant, coiled, and dangerous, to drive annexation forward. Calhoun's lettered defenses of slavery as a positive good bleed into the diplomacy and make of Texas a referendum on the slave power itself. The Senate recoils. A treaty fails. Tyler, stubborn and supple by turns, adopts a different instrument, annexation by joint resolution, a lower threshold to climb, and a precedent that makes cautious men mutter about ends and means. The election of 1844 settles the noise around him. Polk's victory is read as a mandate for expansion, and yet the signature that binds Texas to the Union is his, and the date belongs to his last days in office. That is his method at its most revealing, to take a cause to which he has committed the full seriousness of his constitutional faith, and to shepherd it by any procedure he believes lawful, ignoring the ache of those who wish the result had been delayed for comedy's sake. He will not apologize for believing that the map must match the nation's mood. Others will not forgive him the way the mood was measured. He does not live only by quarrels. Under his hand, Caleb Cushing negotiates the Treaty of Wangia with China, crafting the first formal commercial framework between the Republic and an empire that had long treated foreign trade as a series of humiliations imposed upon supplicants. The treaty secures most favored nation treatment, opens ports, and, significantly, establishes extraterritoriality, the legal fiction that Americans in China will answer to American law. It is not equality, but it is a beginning that replaces piracy and presumption with pages that courts can read. Tyler also articulates, through Webster and later himself, a policy toward the Hawaiian Kingdom that treats European colonization there as an unfriendly act. The Tyler Doctrine, quieter than the Monroe Doctrine's trumpet, but kin to it in spirit, announces that the Pacific, too, has a perimeter, and that the United States will defend an island monarchy's independence, not with a squadron, but with a sentence that other capitals must factor into their arithmetic. His domestic ledger, eclipsed by the headline fights, includes measures that show a practical temper. He signs the Preemption Act of 1841, the so-called Log Cabin Bill, which acknowledges the reality of settlers already on public land and gives them the right to buy their claims at a minimum price before speculators can maneuver around them. He signs a general bankruptcy law, briefly popular, soon repealed, because the panic years have left merchants and mechanics choked by debts no honest man can pay without years surrendered to futility. He signs appropriations for Samuel Morse's experimental telegraph line between Washington and Baltimore, and so the famous message, "What hath God wrought?" runs on copper during his time, a proverb that, if you like metaphors, suits his presidency, a short sentence that begins a very long paragraph. He sees the long Seminole conflict wind down. He watches Florida become a state. He treats routine as the heart of the job, even when scandal and nicknames try to make theater its blood. He is not loved for any of this. Popular government often mistakes noise for principle and novelty for sin. Tyler makes three kinds of enemies at once: Whigs, who think he has stolen their victory and spent it on scruples; Democrats who suspect him as an apostate in borrowed clothes, and men of the newspapers who cannot sell subscriptions on the back of veto messages as easily as on caricatures of grand systems. He does not cultivate martyrdom. He prefers to be correct. That preference can read as vanity. It is, more often, a survival of the older Virginia belief that self-respect is a kind of civic hygiene and that compromise must be earned, not presumed. He does not refuse bargains. He refuses decorations disguised as laws. If you wish to see him as obstinate, the evidence is abundant. If you wish to see him as steady, the same evidence will do. Inside the president's house, he permits sentiment to interrupt severity. Letitia Tyler, his first wife, dies there in 1842 after a long decline. The first lady to die in that mansion. And the house falls quiet in a way the newspapers do not record. 2 years later, Julia Gardner becomes Julia Tyler, and the quiet house turns musical again. Receptions, decorations, a first lady who understands that ritual can redeem rancor for an evening, and that a presidency under siege can still look like a government under glass. He is, by then, a father many times over, and will be still again. 15 children is the number history will repeat with a smile, as if virility could palliate the loneliness of being the only member of one's party, which is how Washington often makes a man feel when the votes fall the way they have for you. He leaves office as he entered it, insisting on the reality of his authority and the legality of his acts. No party embraces him. No statue is commissioned in the hour of departure. He goes home to Sherwood Forest, a chosen name that makes a joke of exile and a creed of outlawry, and watches the government he served move into arguments he has helped arrange but will not resolve. The map enlarged, the sectional fever rising, the telegraph straining new nerves across a body that does not yet know how to feel with them. He writes, farms, entertains, practices the art of aging in a republic that can forget a man almost as fast as it can hate him. He is not finished with oaths. When 1861 arrives, and Virginia faces the abomination of choosing between Union and a Confederacy stitched out of fear and principle and calculation, Tyler sides with his state. He presides, with other gray dignities, over the Virginia Peace Convention that tries to summon compromise out of the air one last time. When that fails, he joins the Confederate Congress and dies in Richmond before he can take his seat. The United States does not mourn him with flags at half-staff. The Confederacy buries him as one of theirs. His last political identity is a verdict the reunited country will not rush to forgive. How then to judge him, stripped of rumor and of the laziness that repeats accidental, as if the word could bear so much? Begin with the succession. He fixes, by example, a principle the parchment had left unspoken. The vice president who follows a dead president is the president in full. The cabinet is advisory, not sovereign. A party's majority does not own the executive when the executive is filled by a man whose name happened to be on the same sheet of paper as theirs. That lesson later generations will wrap in the clarity of an amendment. Tyler wrote it in the ink of audacity. Then, the veto. He teaches Congress to read a president's negative as an argument rather than as a tantrum. He offends ambitious men who thought of the White House as a counter where a platform could be redeemed for law. He insists that the platform is not a statute and the Constitution is not a menu. Much of what he refuses, time will refuse with him. Much of what he declines to build will be built under other names. But he forces the polity to accept that a president can be a brake without being a villain, and a lawyer without being a clerk. On foreign soil he is to be praised without reservation, the Northern Line settled, the Pacific balance named, a treaty with China framed without gunboats, the diplomacy of slave trade suppression enlarged, if not perfected. On the southwestern frontier, he is to be judged with the ambivalence he earns. Texas, brought in by a mechanism that made constitutionalists wince and expansionists cheer, becomes both the victory he desired and the fuse he did not crave. He did not invent slavery's reach. He gave it new rooms to argue in. He did not design the war that would follow. He arranged the furniture inside which the decision to fight would be made possible. He moved history the way a careful man moves a heavy chest across a floor, calculating pressure, corners, and the friction of opinion, no less responsible for the scratches because he did not break the chest. His faults are the faults of his caste and creed. He believed too cleanly that states are moral beings and that the federal government is a bargain renewed rather than a nation breathing. He believed the Union was a good so long as it did not ask Virginia to feel small. He believed the law was a fence that could keep appetites from wandering. He underestimated the appetite that calls itself destiny and the force with which it will kick down fences if kept waiting. He preferred decency to grandeur. He did not understand how addictive grandeur would be in a country about to discover its own immensity. He made enemies when friends were cheap and kept his friends when they made him expensive. He was, in a phrase, a gentleman who took the office literally, which is a compliment and a diagnosis. What endures is not a statue or a slogan, but a set of rooms he furnished. In one, a sudden vacancy is treated as a fact to be administered, not a crisis to be democratized. In another, a cabinet learns it serves at the president's pleasure, even when it imagines it is a parliament. In another, a treaty reads like respect instead of a wager. In another, a veto reads like an essay. In another, a telegraph clicks out a sentence that will later become a paragraph of centuries. In another, a first lady receives the city with a grace that refuses to let rancor be the only flavor in the house. There is even a room, Sherwood, full of family and of the stubbornness that is half virtue, half alibi, where a man out of favor practices the art of being unnecessary, which is the hardest art a politician can learn. The country learned from him more than it admitted. It learned that the line of succession is not etiquette. It learned that a president who is nobody's instrument can still be the republic's. It learned that parties may make governments, but do not own them. It learned, too, that adding land adds quarrels, and that a signature at the end of a joint resolution is sometimes the most dangerous kind of punctuation, a tidy mark at the end of a sentence that cannot be finished without a chapter you would rather not read. If we owe him thanks, give it for the succession and for the bargains made with dignity. If we owe him warning, keep it for the annexation, completed with an instrument that proved how easy it is to bend forms when you are certain you are right. Imagine him in 3 scenes to carry away. First, the morning he enters the White House as more than a guest, chooses the desk as if by right, and asks for the papers that a clerk would have asked him to initial had he accepted the title acting. He sets a precedent by sitting down. The second, a cabinet room where Clay's lieutenants deliver a bill with a new title and old organs, and the president, pen in hand, explains in a prose too calm to be dismissed why the name does not cure the disease. The third, a gray afternoon on the Potomac, smoke and screams on the deck of an elegant ship, death interrupting a policy, and a widower comforting a new widow before either of them knows that the house on Pennsylvania Avenue will soon require a hostess again. In all 3 scenes he is not grand, he is firm. The Republic outlasts grandeur more easily than it outlasts firmness. If you wish to place him, put him between the giant who made party machinery sing and the small man who turned the presidency into an argument in the street. He is less than Clay's imagination and more than Clay's instrument. He is less than Jackson's thunder and more than Jackson's shadow. He is, in the ledger, a maker of practical law about money, a signer of first treaties with far empires, a name at the bottom of annexation that would have occurred anyway and still makes his signature matter, a husband twice, a father many times over, a Virginian who died wearing a flag the United States could not honor. His epitaph cannot be simple because simplicity would be a lie. But it can be just. He took the office whole. He made the veto honest. He kept the peace where arrogance would have bought a war. He moved the map as if moving furniture. He mistook state sovereignty for a cure when it was at best a constraint. He left the Union stronger in its forms and weaker in its calm. He taught the country how to proceed when fate removes a leader without removing the need for leadership. That lesson has served more often than we remember, because successions that proceed without drama are the kind that never make the news. There is a temptation, with men like Tyler, to let the nickname stand in for the man. Accidency is clever and cruel, and like most clever and cruel things, inadequate. The Apprentice Republic needed precisely once. A proof that the office could pass from hand to hand, without a second election and without the poisonous invention of regents and councils. He gave it the proof and accepted the insult as the cost. We benefit still, and he is still reduced. Another temptation is to treat his resistance to the bank as the peak of an ingrate. In truth, his bank vetoes sit in the same drawer as his suspicion of conscription by party and his chipped respect for state prerogatives. A belief that liberty has a structural component and that the central government, when given a handsome new instrument, will learn to play it loudly. We can disagree with that belief without pretending it was invented to irritate Henry Clay. Tyler's tragedy, if the word is not too grand for a man who outlived his office and died in his bed, is that the center he served was already moving away from him. He believed politics was made of compacts, that compacts were maintained by restraint, and that restraint was taught by habit. He was right, often enough to vindicate the method, and wrong, often enough to damn it in certain hours. The 1840s did not want restraint. They wanted acres and proofs. They wanted the telegraph to shriek its first sentence across a continent that still measured travel by the day's ride. They wanted Texas and Oregon and a new arithmetic in the Senate and the new quarrels those numbers guaranteed. He stood in the stream with his hand up and let some of the water run around him while guiding some into channels. A more theatrical man would have claimed to have stopped or redirected the river. He would have mistaken applause for hydraulics. Tyler did not. He did what engineers do. He placed rocks where they would matter and accepted the wet. If we go looking for the person behind the method, we find in letters and recollections neither sate nor schemer. We find courtesy made into habit, melancholy tucked behind correctness, a willingness to be alone in a room full of colleagues, pride held like a spine rather than a flag. We find a man who could sit with his children in the evening and then write with a stylus of ice to men who wanted him to debase a principle into an expedient. We find a man who could fall in love while navigating a government's grief without advertising either. We find, lastly, a Virginian who could not finally choose a nation over a state, because for him, the nation was a federation of homes and laws, not a leviathan with a single heart. The Civil War punishes that definition more cruelly than any debate could. He did not live to see the punishment exhausted. He did live to choose a side that history would mark with chains and line after line of the dead. He is not easy to praise without qualification, and not easy to condemn without footnotes. That is often a sign of seriousness. The republic he served, and then left, and then opposed, has a habit of producing men whose virtues are illuminated by the very mistakes they enable. From him, we can take 3 tools and a caution. The tools: succession executed as law rather than improvisation, veto argued as principle rather than tantrum, and diplomacy pursued as arithmetic rather than posture. The caution: annexation or any great enlargement accomplished by cleverness rather than consensus is an invoice presented later to people who did not get a vote. You have paid that bill more than once. We will again if we confuse appetite with authority. The last image: Sherwood Forest, a long house under long trees, the rooms full of children and their echoes, a man at a desk with a map of a nation he helped to shape and unmake with the same pen. He is an old lawyer reading newspapers that despise him and some that have forgotten him, smiling when the telegraph clicks, walking under his oaks when the air is honest, exactly as proud as a man should be who once carried an office into its adulthood and then set it down. If you listen hard, you can hear the steady rule he established still ticking beneath our louder dramas. If the president dies, the vice president is the president. If a bill is foolish or unconstitutional, the veto may teach. If a treaty can be written, peace can be made with a signature instead of a salute. Those are not small bequests. They are the mechanisms by which a noisy republic keeps from flying apart.